Much more important to kill the children, because they will grow up and want to exact revenge. Those were the words of Adolf Eichmann, mastermind of the Nazis' final solution program. Imagine that in order to stay alive, you have to leave everything you know behind: parents, home, friends and school, and travel alone to an unknown future. Between 1938 and 1939, 10,000 Jewish children landed on the shores of Britain, unaccompanied by their parents and with little else than a suitcase and a label around their neck, uncertain of how to continue life away from family and home.
One day my mother came home, kissed me, cuddled me. "Otto, you're going to England." England? I knew it was an island. I knew I would see the sea. I was excited. "Well, when are we going?" "No, Otto, not we, but you." "Me?"
We didn't really know where we were going till we got off the train at Liverpool Street Station. I didn't know any English. I knew 3 sentences. I have hunger, I have sister, Eva, and I need toilet. And that was my limit.
Hitler came to power in Germany with the Nazis in 1933. By the late 1930s, the Nazis had invaded Austria and Czechoslovakia, and Hitler had made clear his visions of an Aryan Europe, free of Jews. Jewish families were torn apart by systematic persecution and forced to live a life in fear and constant danger.
I remember that day very well when the Nazis marched into our square. I just crept to the side of my parents, who were looking out of the window, and the streets were lined with the citizens of our town. And they started singing the Czech national anthem, which began with the words, "Where is my home?" I didn't realize then that our home was no longer ours. But being only 10 years old, I didn't really understand what the occupation was about to mean.
Otto Deutsch and thousands of other children's lives were deeply disrupted as they were ripped out of their schools and homes.
Yes, that must be the school I went to, Quellengasse. I'm sure it is. Of course it is, yes. I was a little boy then. Gosh, not yet 11 years of age. My father had hopes that I would learn English here. I did start English, but the Herr Professor said, "Try something else, Otto. You'll never, ever learn English." That is the school.
With their arrival, schools all over Britain had to prepare to receive these children of uprooted lives. Teacher Hans Meyer, himself a refugee from Nazi Germany, understood that school would have to play much more than its usual role.
I felt that very important part of the need of these children transports was their feeling that the school was more than a scholastic institution, but was making an effort to offer them security, affection, care, to help them to overcome this severe disturbance. We had to replace what really was irreplaceable, and that is the family life, the love, the care, the affection.
Otto returns for the first time in 68 years to his home in Austria, the home he hasn't seen since his dramatic parting from his family as a 10-year-old boy.
This is where I used to live when I was a boy. The memories are absolutely fantastic as I stand here, because this entrance lobby hasn't changed at all. Yeah, this is where the toilets used to be. I don't suppose they use those now, for there were no indoor toilets. Kitchen, a kitchen without water. There was a water tap here somewhere, where in the morning everybody collected their water. And I lived in number 15. That's right over here. Gosh, can this really be where I grew up? It's almost unbelievable. There were bittersweet memories. Bitter because of what it entailed. Sweet because I was with people I loved.
The commandant of the German troops turned up. He looked at Father and he said, I hear that you and your family can speak German. And Father said, that is so. And the commandant went on, from now on, I want only German spoken in this house. And Father looked the commandant straight in the eye and he said, I'm the head of this household. And as long as I live, we shall speak Czech and German only in your presence. At that, the commandant stood up and he spat in Father's face, and I stood there watching the saliva run down his cheeks. And I vowed there and then that I'd never ever speak another word of German.
My best friend lived in that door over here, look. And we were mostly in each other's houses. The families used to eat together. It was cheaper to cook together. And Kurt's father and my father were in the same trenches together in the First World War. They were old comrades. Or they used to talk about the war like most fathers do. But unfortunately, I got bad memories about that door over there. Because in the Anschluss, the very day after I returned from the parliament, the Hitler Youth came up here to shout, are there any Jews here? And he opened the door and said, yes, of course, number 15. I can never forget that.
Persecution of Jews in Nazi-occupied territory reached an apex in 1938, with what became known as Kristallnacht, named after the glass in the streets from the windows of Jewish-owned shops.
It was a cold November morning, and I remember Mother saying to me, Otto, I want you to walk away as far as possible. That's strange. She always told me not to walk far away. Walk away from here, but come back when it's dark. And I finished up here, this very spot, I believe. And I saw something which I can never ever forget. No matter how long the Almighty will allow me to live. For it was here that elderly men and women were forced to clean up the mess that the horses made. And the people jeered and laughed, and they enjoyed it.
But I didn't, for I couldn't realize in my 10 years that people can be so cruel. It's funny how clearly it all is in my mind at this very moment.
Kristallnacht was a wake-up call to British parliamentarians about the extent of the Nazi persecution of its own people. A bill was passed to change immigration laws so that unaccompanied child refugees from Nazi-occupied territories would be allowed into the country, on what would become known as the Kindertransport. On the condition that families could find a sponsor and pay £50, Jewish children would be allowed into Britain to be placed in foster homes, hostels or boarding schools, so as not to be a burden on the state.
We were sitting at supper one evening and Mother wasn't eating. She suddenly looked at Father and she said very softly, "I heard today that both Eva and Vera can go to England." Father looked so shocked and he buried his face in his hands, and then he looked up to her and there were tears in his eyes as he said, "All right, let them go." I didn't realise then what it meant to say those words, what it meant to them to let us go.
Otto and Vera were 2 of 10,000 children who managed to escape a fate of continuous persecution, but were forced to leave family and home behind.
We were allowed 1 suitcase each. The suitcase was packed under supervision, and the Nazis came to the house to check what our parents had packed in it, sealed it, so nothing could be sort of smuggled into it later on. A rucksack or hand luggage of some sort was also allowed, and in that we packed our most treasured possessions that we wanted to bring along. I remember what I packed in it, a few books and photographs and some little souvenirs from home, and that's how we left.
So here I am at the Westbahnhof, and I walked here with my lovely sister Adele and my mother. I had no idea what the future was to bring for me. I had no idea that I would never see them again.
There was a line of brown-shirted SA men, linking arms. We were on the train with all the weeping parents, and that was basically it, except that my mother tried to move forward, and an SA man pushed her back and then knocked her down. And I remember leaning forward, because I'd got to a window, and comforting her and saying, "Don't cry, don't cry." And it is one of the things that I've always felt, that it's obscene for a 10-year-old to comfort an adult in those circumstances.
Upon arrival in Britain, some children were placed in temporary reception camps. The rest came to Liverpool Street Station, where they waited to find out where they would go next.
I was collected a few days after arriving by Mummy Rainford. The first word she said to me, she ran towards me and embraced me, "Where you shall be loved." And I didn't realise then what they meant, and I didn't realise then that those were the words any refugee child, any orphan child, any child in danger can hear. That first day, we travelled to Liverpool and then to Bootle, where my foster sister Dorothy, who was 2 years older than me, was waiting for me. Remember, she had long pigtails and a lovely smile, and I realised, I knew we would be friends from the beginning. Right. And you had pigtails.
That's right.
I remember, and you took me by the hand.
Did I?
Yes, yes, and Mummy did it by the other, and
I remember you had to have a
here.
sack on your back.
Oh, I know.
And we thought that was all your worldly possessions.
I always think when you took me up there and I had that little bedroom, I opened that little window and the sky was full of stars, and that was the first day I spoke to my mother and father through the stars and the moon, and I said, you should be smiling too, because I've got a lovely family.
There we are.
And I had, didn't I? I had a really lovely family. It was, yeah, I was lucky.
My cousin and I, we had to wait quite some time before finally our names were on the board. And this was to go to a place called Gateshead, which is on the other side of Newcastle. But we didn't stay there very long because all the populations of all the children from Gateshead were evacuated, not too far, to a lovely market town called Morpeth. Well, I was a novelty. They had never, I mean, somebody from London would have been a novelty because it's a close-knit community. In a place like Morpeth, I couldn't understand a word they were saying. I mean, for goodness sake, I must have, they taught me words perhaps which I shouldn't have said to the teacher, because the teacher was not angry with me, he was angry with the boys. I couldn't speak a word of English, I couldn't communicate. And they must have said, please sir, can we touch him? As if I was somebody from outer space. I mean, an Austrian and a Jew, they heard about Jews, but in their scripture lessons, but to see one. But eventually I began to pick up the language. I became a little Geordie lad. And to this very day I can speak perfect Geordie. And if ever I speak to someone from the northeast, I can still say, how are hinny? I didn't know what you're talking about, man. Why are you hinny? And that was the first English I ever heard.
The first few days were really a great struggle for me. When you're sitting there and you don't understand what's going on, and when you don't understand the lessons or what the teacher is saying, geography, English or history, just couldn't understand a word those first few days. And the children at the school, they were not nasty, not like the children in Germany were, although a bit of cruelty exists in all children, and you did feel that, you know, they looked at you and laughed at you, etc.
It wasn't more than 3 days later that I was taken to school by Mummy Rainford, and I couldn't believe what I saw, because the street was lined with kids. I think every child from that school was waiting to see what I looked like, thinking probably I looked like someone from outer space. Well, of course the school is no longer there, but the memories of that first day and the few weeks I spent there before we were evacuated, they are very precious memories, and they're completely unforgettable.
We remembered that in the junior school here was a Miss Parker who used to enjoy going to Switzerland for her holidays. She had been learning German, so from the German, Vera had her first English lesson.
I have a report at the end of that first year, and by the end of the first year I was first in English, and that made me feel very proud and very important, and lots of it was thanks to her. We spent hours when she was saying, look, I stop, I walk, I go, I run, and you know, starting with all the little expressions. And I thought, great, I'll teach her Czech. at the same time. I did succeed in teaching her a little song. She does remember the song today.
To jest latte poswiecenie, teraz latem niedzielę. Mama masała za zmazu, kromy kosy pieczenie.
We had come to not really to have a fine education, because that was reserved for the British children. We just came to, you know, to come as children, to be looked after in families. And the lucky ones came to families who believed in education.
I was moved around because the schools were evacuated to different places. So I ended up within my total years in England, before going up to Cambridge, with 17 different foster homes, which was very unsettling, obviously. I was always frightened I never completely unpacked my suitcase. I began to think of school as home. I was encouraged, I was liked. And if you don't have a home, you make school your home.
Bunce Court, situated in Kent, was one of the boarding schools in Britain that tried to offer a home life for a large number of the children of the Kindertransport.
And on the right was my room, and in the back of our room there were the boys between 12 and 14. And down here, that was the office, then again the passageway that went originally right through the house. Here was a library.
In the early stages of the arrival of children with the Kindertransport, there was still communication between the children and their parents. But the greatest difficulties arose when this communication became shorter and less frequent, and eventually ceased to exist altogether. And the question arose, why? We couldn't comfort the children with good conscience that they would see their parents again, but we could not tell them that that was the end of their family relationships. And as time went on, and as the letters ceased, and the uncertainty increased, it became our task to help the children over that very, very hard time. My parents wrote letters and we received them and vice versa. You couldn't write much because the letters in Germany were opened by the Gestapo, incoming and outgoing letters, and you were not allowed to say things. In 1942, we had a letter from the Red Cross saying, sorry, we couldn't deliver your most recent letter because your parents have been deported to an unknown destination. That destination was Auschwitz, where they were subsequently gassed to death. We did not know the destination, but as all communication had totally ceased from 1942, we feared and thought that we wouldn't see them again.
But even Kurt kept his distance from me all of a sudden. Nor was I invited to go next door. What's happening? And more of my friends kept away from me. What have I done?
Today, many of those who were children of the Kindertransport not only meet to talk about their memories, but also spend their time writing books and educating others about their experiences as child refugees. For others, it is a time they would rather forget.
I'm so profoundly damaged by what happened that I can't confront the present without constantly bemoaning what I've lost.
And when I got home, my lovely sister Adele and my mother were in tears. My father wasn't there. They took him, never ever to see him again. For me, when I concentrate on it as I'm doing now, it could be yesterday.
I think any refugee is damaged because they're uprooted. And some are obviously uprooted under much more brutal circumstances than others. The knowledge that you're never completely part of Britain, that you're certainly no longer completely part of where you came from, and you're somehow sort of floating around in no man's land.
I wanted to ask Papa, my father, why is it so bad being a Jew? I never got to it. Because from now on, things became progressively worse.
I had filled 12 diaries for my parents, and I never opened them because they were meant for them alone. But I realized, oh no, I wrote those diaries from the age of 11 to 16. I must use them to educate the children and to say thank you to Britain for saving so many lives, for taking us in, for giving us love and giving us support.
Well, I'll say it myself. I was a nice little boy. This is something which I shouldn't say. Oh, come on, let the girls in the back say I was a nice little boy as well. Wasn't I a nice little boy? I thought you was going to say no for a moment. I have changed a little bit, and the colour of my hair's gone up, but well, never mind.